if I supply Whole Foods with vegetables, wait a minute. If you supply Whole Foods with vegetables, how can you come down with a truck and sell vegetables right across the street from Whole Foods?
So what are you trying to say?
That's not what I'm trying to say. It's what has been written in law and what is respected amongst business people about supply lines and supply routes and areas.
But what's that have to do with
territories?
Getting a purpose in life and getting something you love to do and get paid for it? So you
gotta be able to see the picture. You can't look at what's going on here.
How long does it take to? But don't you know it by now?
You didn't even know what I'm trying to indicate right now. We got a block right here somewhere.
No, because I don't understand, like...
See? You still don't understand.
You don't understand what's wrong with you selling vegetables to Whole Foods to be sold in this general area. You understand? Wait a minute. You understand? You remember when McDonald's wanted to set up more restaurants in Manhattan? You know about national retail chains? Excuse me. You know about national retail chains?
Yes, but I mean, why?
Wait a minute.
Why am I worried about all this? I want to go.
It's not. Wait a minute. We're talking about fruits and vegetables, which is farm product. Wait a minute. Okay. If you don't raise crops yourself, you need to purchase them from someone who has raised them. I didn't say there was anything wrong with it yet.
So then you get something you do and you charge.
Wait a minute. You're not waiting a minute. Because we're at the end game of all of that. They already produce fruits and vegetables on the farms. Now this is an aggregation because you know what? You know about farm business like agribusiness, Archer Daniels Midland, okay, and ConAgra and Monsanto. You understand Monsanto?
Yes.
You understand ConAgra? You understand how they have you understand that? She's not really getting this. You know what?
No. She has a capitalist view and she thinks everybody should believe her.
I just said I don't understand how somebody wants to sit in a park and talk about all this shit.
Forget about that.
And not go out and have a home and a house.
Wait a minute. Forget about all that. Because here's the thing. My father was raised at the tail end of the sharecropping days. You know what the sharecropping days in the country represent? You know about slavery? Wait a minute. Let me draw a timeline for you. You need to investigate the psychology of the people of this country that have been involved in the agrarian system and the industrialist system in the North, and the battle between them for position. You understand that? How the industrialist North basically took over the agrarian South based on like their utilization of labor on an extreme level. Okay, it is a continuation. Wait, we're jumping ahead of ourselves. We don't understand. Okay, first of all, this is extreme usage of labor which began to impinge upon the North after the antebellum period. You know the antebellum period? You know they turned the South into 5 military territories, right? And made them adhere to a list of rules. They moved the federal union from the Bowery of New York City to Maryland, D.C., which was blueprinted and laid out by Benjamin Banneker, an African American who was also a Mason. You understand that? You gotta follow the continuation in the process. Now, these 5 military territories, which were the former Confederate renegade states, had to adhere to a list of rules to join the federal union. Now, they were military territories, meaning that the North had placed military garrisons and had placed black soldiers who helped deliver the North. The North was being defeated by the Southern Confederacy because the Southern Confederacy was using African Americans to reload their guns between the lines. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. The Southern states were using African Americans to reload their guns between the lines. And they were defeating the North one battle after the next because the North was bent on, well, God has shown us the humanity of the black man. Now this is what they're saying, and that he's just as much human and he's mentally capable of escaping those restricting conditions of the Southern brother in the South. Okay, so we can march against the South with an all-white Union Army. And it's going to be defeated one battle after next by Robert E. Lee. He was soaking the East Coast with Northern Union Army blood until the radical Republicans and the abolitionists convinced Abraham Lincoln to include the freed blacks in the Union Army at Gettysburg. That was the first, only major defeat of the South by the Northern Army. And that turned the tide. That one battle at Gettysburg, right, turned the tide of the Civil War.
What does it have to do? I'm not trying to be mean. You have a really great.
I got to draw the conclusion. You have to understand that.
You have to be careful. You have to be patient.
We haven't gotten to the meat of what I'm trying to indicate.
Well, how long does that take?
I'm trying to say, but if you don't have the historical perspective on the relationship between, look at the mentality of someone who's trying to capitalize the extremity of enslaving someone, and then look at the North. What the North did was basically hubris concealed as this puritanical, ethical humanism. You understand what I'm saying?
I understand, but I'm still.
You're still not. I have to draw the historical context of how you have these mentalities. I haven't gotten there yet. I still got to cement this because you're trying to march on when you haven't even. It's like you keep like a little child. You keep running ahead.
No,
I'm saying, look right here.
How that has to do with
you have to get right here before we can move. Get to this point. We gotta start right there. As long as you're asking me, these questions, it means that you're not fixating enough to deal with what we're talking about.
It's okay. You keep on explain. Explain your point. No problem.
Here we go. Now, it has
that's
to do,
okay, honey. You take care of the animals.
It has to do with.
We have people watching you. No problem. Please stop asking viewers.
You know, all of the markets have always been transnational and global. The cotton market, the tobacco market, the slave market. You understand that? The slaves that were working the southern plantations were actually unloaded on Wall Street. And on either side of the Bowery, as early as the 1600s, there were African people living on either side of the Bowery on farms. The Dutch brought them in there because the Dutch didn't have it within their own white genome to drive the Indians out. There was something about the darker skinned races that was just like aggressively like you couldn't move them out. So they brought Africans, which had the genetics to move the Indians further up northward. That's also the case which in the westward migration under Manifest Destiny in the country, there were Plains Indians that were ripping the settlers to shreds on the plains until the African American was free after the Civil War, and then the march out to the West Coast really took a purposeful culmination. Okay, so that's just painting a small picture of the history, but it's important to realize that the nature of the capital market. This is cotton going all over the world. This is cotton going feeding Europe, clothing Europe from the South in the United States. And then the Civil War. Did you know the Civil War was some of the most dead men out of any of the wars that were ever fought? 700,000 people. 700,000 people died in the Civil War, whereas only 400,000 died in World War II, when they had sophisticated machinery. You know, so I mean, and then we're all talking about markets. We're talking about people, publicans. We're talking about people who demand their unequal share of all the resources. They don't care how much they have to squeeze at the bottom. And then post-antebellum, after the South adhered to the rules and regulations, adhere to the rules and regulations, and join the Union, okay? And then that started later on the Southern Civil War lynching period. Many of the black territorial leaders were forced to flee the South due to the lynching of the late 1800s, early 1900s. You're talking about what's up here now. Okay, but all of this is a derivation of the struggle between the capital markets, the management, industrial sector, and the labor at the bottom. Okay, it's all a collusion. Now, post-antebellum, you got such towns like oil towns like Tulsa, Oklahoma. You got Rosewood, Florida. You got positions where the territorial overseers and all these kind of things from the antebellum period of Southern renegade states formed cities and had their own measures of trade, interstate trade and so forth. Okay, and got jealousy on certain parts. Like in Tulsa, Oklahoma, you had oil. It was a boom oil town, which had a black section, which had multi-millionaires, and you had white people who were like ordinary farm people, and they didn't want to tolerate that, so they raided it and burned it. It was the worst race riot in American history. Okay, so this is what you're dealing with. You're not dealing with just capital people. You're not dealing with just these big top-headed publicans telling you got to fight a war. Which these publicans are telling these northerners, this group is Irish, that group is Jewish, that group's Italian. Nobody really understands what you're talking about. It's like fighting in Afghanistan. What are we doing fighting in Afghanistan? That's what they felt when they said we gotta go to the South and fight white people to free black people, or else you could pay $300 to get out of the draft. And they burned down the orphanage. You know, they had slaves that had run up here, and there were kids with them, and they put them in an orphanage on 40th Street. And the Irish Americans burned that down because they said, we're not fighting for this shit. And rather than listen to these top-headed Republicans, I mean, this and post 1900, this is what was going on. There was no real known form of government. FDR sat on the couch with fascists that try to sort out what's a good form of a government. And the Germans were saying, like, we might need some New Deal policies to help our country because the Versailles Treaty was ripping their country to shreds. And all the leaders were sitting, people from Italy and some other countries were sitting on the couch with FDR trying to sort out what's a good form of government. How do you lead a massive population? And shortly after that, you know, who was he? Like Sigmund Freud's nephew was who? The founder of Madison Avenue. The guy who said he's considered the father of public relations. He's the one who came up with Virginia Slim cigarettes, making women think that they can achieve independence or freedom by smoking a long, slender cigarette. You know, this is how the capital market had to develop and pump themselves into people's heads. So you have a systemic push towards dependency. But before that time, like post that development, 1900s in the north, and then other cities like for instance, what's this one where the Blair Witch Project, that's in West Virginia, right? The big struggle between the Hatfields and the McCoys over the mining that was being done, and then they got wind somehow through the grapevine that forming a union would be the best, would get them to get the most valuable, the true usage and the true payment for their labor. And the minute they sat down to talk about it, the company manager turned around and said, okay, no, if you want to talk about a union, you go ahead and talk about the union. We'll bring in other workers. Go back where you come from and give off our property, because the mine owned all the little shantytown buildings and a general store where everything you could buy could be bought. So it's basically their whole setup. You understand what I'm saying? And this is still the case today. Big coal is still at work in many places all around the country. They've opened up a lot of the old oil wells, like I think it's in North Dakota. They actually opened up because the price of oil is high. You know, the